Hey everyone, welcome to this week's first video lecture. In this video, we're going to be looking at some key concepts and the most important things you guys need to know for our upcoming unit exam. So we're going to go through all the sections of the chapter one by one, slide by slide, and I'm going to basically tell you everything that you should be studying for the exam. So let's get started. All right, so in lesson one of this chapter, we talked about the atmosphere. And the key concept from this chapter is what the Earth's atmosphere is composed of. And then some important vocabulary words that we need to study are weather, atmosphere, and water vapor. So what do you need to know for the exam? The first thing you need to know is that Earth's atmosphere is a layer of gas that surrounds the Earth, and it's the foundation of Earth's climate. The other thing you need to know from this lesson is that the air we breathe is made up of 78% nitrogen, 21% oxygen, and then 1% other gases, those other gases being carbon dioxide, argon, water vapor, and other gases. So out of everything on this slide, make sure, and this is important, make sure that you know the percentages of the composition of the atmosphere. So make sure you know that 78% of the air we breathe is nitrogen. Make sure you know that 21% is oxygen. Those two percentages are going to be important for the exam. All right, moving on to lesson two. In lesson two, we talked about air pressure. The key topics for this lesson were what physical properties does air have, what happens to air and air density as you go up and down in altitude. And then some important vocabulary for this lesson was density, air pressure, barometer, and altitude. So what do you absolutely need to know from this lesson for the test? You need to know the different properties of air. So because air has mass, it also has other properties, including density and pressure. You need to know that air pressure decreases as you go up in altitude. So if you climb a mountain, there'll be less air above you, meaning that the air pressure will be less. Also, density, air density decreases as you go up in altitude. And then the last thing you need to know for the exam is that most of the air in our atmosphere, because air has mass, is relatively close to the surface. As you go up higher and higher, there's less and less air. All right, next in lesson three, we talked about the layers of the atmosphere. So the key concepts for this lesson are what are the 5 layers of the atmosphere and how do scientists classify them? Remember, they classify them by temperature. Describe the difference between the troposphere and the stratosphere. So there are some key differences there. Make sure you know them. And then the important vocab from this lesson is troposphere, stratosphere, mesosphere, thermosphere, and exosphere. So just all the different layers. So know the different characteristics of each layer. So the troposphere, it's the layer we live in, and it's the layer where weather occurs. Moving on to the stratosphere contains the ozone layer, which is, very important. So make sure you know that the stratosphere has the ozone layer and make sure you know what the ozone layer is. Next is the mesosphere. The mesosphere is the middle layer and it's also the coldest. After that, we have the thermosphere. It's the warmest layer and it protects the Earth and us from harmful gamma and X-ray radiation. And then finally, we have the exosphere. Remember, exo means outside. The exosphere is the outer layer, and it eventually just fades into space. So make sure you know all the different characteristics of all these layers. All right, in lesson 4, we talked about energy in the atmosphere. So some key topics from lesson 4 are what are the 3 forms of radiation that reach us on Earth's surface? How does the ozone layer interact with energy from the sun? And then describe the greenhouse effect and how it keeps Earth's temperatures stable. And then important vocabulary is electromagnetic waves, radiation, infrared radiation, ultraviolet radiation, and the greenhouse effect. So what you absolutely need to know for this lesson, you need to know the differences between the different forms of radiation that we talked about that reach us on Earth. So the 3 forms of radiation that interact with us consistently here at Earth's surface are infrared radiation, ultraviolet, and visible light. Infrared radiation is invisible, and we feel it as heat. Ultraviolet radiation is also invisible, and we feel it, after a long day at the beach, we can feel ultraviolet radiation because it causes sunburns. And then visible light is a small portion of the entire electromagnetic spectrum that we see. So all the light we see is visible light. All the different colors we see is visible light. This next one's very important. Make sure you know that the ozone layer protects us from harmful ultraviolet radiation. So you need to know what layer of the atmosphere the ozone layer is in. It's the stratosphere, and you need to know why it's important to us. And then finally, the greenhouse effect. Make sure you know how that affects temperatures on Earth. So heat from the sun is trapped in by our atmosphere, which keeps the Earth's temperature relatively stable, and it makes it hospitable for living organisms to live in. All right, moving on to lesson 5. We reviewed heat transfer in this part of the chapter. So the key topics you need to know for the exam are you need to be able to describe the 3 ways heat is transferred, so convection, conduction, and radiation, and how heat is transferred in the troposphere, the layer of the atmosphere we live in. Important vocabulary for this section is temperature, thermometer, convection, and conduction. So what you absolutely need to know for this part of the chapter, there's really not going to be a ton of, there's not going to be a ton of material on the test from this section, but make sure you know the difference between radiation, convection, and conduction and how they interact with the Earth. So if we look at I'm going to take my pen here. I'm going to circle the image. Sorry about the bad circle. I don't have my pen with me. So if we look at that image at the bottom right, the sun's energy heats the ground via radiation. Then the ground heats air close to the surface via conduction. And then when air warms up, it expands, it becomes less dense, and it rises. And we call this, air heating up and rising and then cooling down and sinking. We call that convection. So make sure you know the difference between the 3. All right, last but not least, we have lesson 6. In this lesson, we talked about winds. So the key topics from this lesson are how is wind caused? You need to be able to describe the difference between a sea breeze and a land breeze. And then what is the difference between a global wind and a local wind? Both are very similar, but there's a defining characteristic between the two that separate them. Some important vocab that you guys will need to know is wind, local winds, specifically a sea breeze and a land breeze, global winds, and the Coriolis effect. So what do you absolutely need to know from this lesson? You need to know that wind is caused by high pressure air moving to an area of low pressure air. And this difference in pressure is created by unequal heating of the Earth's surface. So make sure that you know wind is high pressure air moving to an area of low pressure air, and that's caused by the surface of the Earth being heated at unequal rates. Another important thing you need to know is the difference between a local wind and a global wind. Local winds are, winds that are in a local area, a small area. And global winds are obviously, when we hear the word global, we think of the entire world. Global winds are winds that influence, or winds that blow across the entire Earth. And finally, the Coriolis effect. So the rotation of the Earth makes it seem that wind travels in a curved path, and that is the Coriolis effect. So make sure that you know that. All right, so that's it for this video. If you are watching this video and you are in B cohort, we will review, one final time during our Wednesday Google Meet. If you're in A cohort and you watch this video, obviously we will have already reviewed on Wednesday's Google Meet, so this should be just even more review for you. But as always, if you have any questions about the upcoming exam, remember that if you are in B cohort, your exam is Thursday. And then if you are in A cohort, your exam is Monday before the holiday break. So as always, if you have any questions, let me know, and have a good rest of your day.